The Vampire King stood in chains before his enemies, and when they named their price, he didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. Nikolai Nightshade had ruled the vampire territories for 3 centuries, his word absolute law among the immortal bloodlines that dwelled beneath the modern world's notice. His white hair fell past his shoulders in stark contrast to his pale skin, and even bound in silver that burned his flesh, he carried himself with the regal bearing of someone who had never bowed to anyone. The chains wrapped around his wrists and ankles hummed with ancient magic, the only thing capable of holding a vampire of his power and age. He stood in what had once been a warehouse in the industrial district of Chicago, now converted into a makeshift prison by the hunters who had finally managed to capture him. The hunters had been planning this for months. They had studied his movements, learned his weaknesses, and struck when he was most vulnerable, separated from his guard during a diplomatic mission to negotiate territory rights with a werewolf pack in neutral ground. 20 hunters had descended on him with blessed weapons and binding spells, and though he had killed half of them before they subdued him, numbers and preparation had won the night. That had been 3 days ago, and they had kept him weak with silver and deprivation, no blood to replenish his strength. Now their leader stood before him, a weathered man named Marcus who had spent 40 years hunting vampires. Marcus held a phone, and on its screen was a photograph that made something in Nikolai's ancient chest tighten with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. Fear. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair leaving a coffee shop, completely unaware she was being watched. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her face caught in profile as she laughed at something. She looked so alive, so warm, so impossibly human and fragile. Zara Voss had no idea what she meant to the Vampire King. She had no idea vampires existed at all, living her ordinary human life in blissful ignorance of the supernatural world that existed in the shadows of her city. She was 23 years old, worked as a junior architect at a firm downtown, and went to the same coffee shop every morning before work. Nikolai knew these details because he had been watching her for 6 months, ever since the night he had passed her on the street and her scent had stopped him in his tracks. Vampires didn't have soulmates in the romantic sense that humans understood, but they had something close. Once every few centuries, a vampire might encounter a human whose blood sang to them in a way that transcended hunger, whose presence called to something deeper than the predatory instinct. The bond was rare and precious, and among vampire kind, such a human was called a resonant. To harm another vampire's resonant was the gravest crime in their society, punishable by death or worse. But humans didn't know the laws of vampire society, and hunters certainly didn't care. "We know what she is to you," Marcus said, his voice flat and businesslike. "We've been watching you watch her. We've documented every time you've followed her home, every night you've stood outside her apartment building, every protection ward you've had your people place around her neighborhood." Nikolai said nothing, his dark eyes fixed on the screen. His jaw was set, his expression carefully neutral, but inside him, rage and terror warred for dominance. He had been so careful. He had never approached Zara directly, never spoken to her, never allowed her to see him. He had simply ensured she was safe, that no threats from his world could touch her. He had told himself he was protecting her by keeping his distance, that she would live a better life, never knowing he existed. Now that distance meant she had no idea she needed protecting. "Here's our offer," Marcus continued. "You abdicate. You step down as king of the vampire territories and dissolve your court. You sign over your authority to a council of our choosing, vampires who will agree to stricter laws governing your kind's interaction with humans. You do this publicly, in front of your people, so they know the transfer of power is legitimate. You give us your crown. And if I refuse?" Nikolai's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of centuries of command. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Then we kill her. Slowly. We'll make sure you hear every scream before we finally put you in the sun." The silver chains clinked as Nikolai's hands tightened into fists. The metal seared his skin, the smell of burning flesh filling the air, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing through possibilities, calculating odds. He could break these chains if he had blood, real blood, not the synthetic substitute they'd been forcing down his throat to keep him barely alive. He could kill everyone in this building in minutes if he was at full strength. But he wasn't, and by the time he could be, Zara would be dead. He could refuse and hope his people would mount a rescue before the hunters made good on their threat. His second-in-command, Lucian, would be searching for him. The vampire court would be in chaos without their king, but they would be looking. But would they find him in time? And even if they did, the hunters had Zara's location. They could kill her the moment they realized a rescue was underway. Nikolai had commanded armies. He had won wars and crushed rebellions. He had built his power through 3 centuries of careful strategy and ruthless execution. He had never surrendered, never compromised, never shown weakness to his enemies. But as he looked at that photograph, at the woman who didn't even know his name, he realized that none of it mattered. Not his crown, not his power, not his pride. Nothing mattered except keeping her alive. "I'll do it," he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by how quickly the Vampire King had capitulated. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Nikolai met the hunter's eyes. "But I have conditions. You bring her here first. I need to see that she's unharmed. After I've confirmed she's safe, I'll abdicate before my court. Once the transfer of power is complete and your puppet council's installed, you release her with no memory of any of this. She goes back to her normal life and is never contacted by hunters or vampires again. Those are my terms." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "You're in no position to make demands." "Then kill me now and lose your leverage." Nikolai's voice was utterly calm. "You need me to cooperate to make this legitimate. If I refuse to speak the words of abdication, if I tell my court this is under duress, they won't accept the new council. You'll have civil war among the vampire territories, which I assume is the opposite of what you want. So yes, I'm in a position to make demands. Bring her here. Let me see she's safe. Then I'll give you everything you want." There was a long silence. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly. "Fine, we'll bring her in. But if you try anything, if you make any move against my people, she dies. Understood?" "Understood." Marcus turned and walked away, speaking in low tones to his subordinates. Nikolai closed his eyes, leaning back against the concrete wall behind him. The silver chains burned constantly, a reminder of his current weakness. But he welcomed the pain. It gave him something to focus on besides the fear. He had never spoken to Zara Voss, had never touched her, had never let her know he existed. But from the moment he had first caught her scent 6 months ago, she had become the center of his world in a way nothing had been for centuries. He had told himself he was being noble by staying away, that a human woman deserved better than to be dragged into the darkness of vampire society. He had told himself he was protecting her. What a fool he had been. Hours passed. Nikolai remained motionless against the wall, conserving his strength. Vampires could go weeks without blood if necessary, though it weakened them considerably. He had been given just enough synthetic blood substitute to keep him from falling into torpor. The death-like sleep vampires entered when completely drained. His throat burned with thirst, and every muscle ached, but he forced himself to remain alert. Finally, he heard car doors outside. Voices. The warehouse door opened, and Marcus entered with 2 other hunters, dragging a struggling figure between them. Nikolai's eyes snapped open, and for the first time in 3 days, he moved, lunging forward against his chains. The silver bit deep into his wrists and ankles, holding him back, but his sudden motion made the hunters jump, raising their weapons. "Don't hurt her," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Zara Voss looked terrified. She had a bruise forming on her cheek, and her clothes were disheveled. Her dark eyes were wide with confusion and fear as she looked around the warehouse. When her gaze landed on Nikolai, she froze. Even in his weakened state, chained and burned, Nikolai knew what he looked like. His white hair was matted with dried blood, and his pale skin bore burns from the silver chains. His black clothes were torn, revealing more burns and wounds that would have killed a human. But it was probably his eyes that frightened her most, the way they reflected light in the dimness like a predator's, the way they fixed on her with an intensity that was decidedly inhuman. "What the hell is this?" Zara's voice shook, but there was anger beneath the fear. "Who are you people? Why did you grab me off the street?" "Ms. Voss," Marcus said calmly, "you're here because this creature has an unhealthy interest in you. We need your cooperation to ensure he does what we want." "This creature?" Zara looked at Nikolai again, her expression confused. I don't understand. I've never seen him before in my life. That's because he's been stalking you for months without your knowledge, Marcus explained. He's what's called a vampire, Ms. Voss. They're real, they live among us, and this particular one is very dangerous. Zara laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. A vampire. You kidnapped me because of a vampire. This is insane. This is actually insane. Look at him, Marcus said. Really look. Zara did, and Nikolai held her gaze. He saw the moment she registered the inhuman qualities, the way his eyes caught the light, the unnatural pallor of his skin, the fact that his chest didn't seem to move with breath. He saw fear sharpen in her expression, but also confusion. Even if this is real, she said slowly, even if he's actually a vampire, why do you think he cares about me? I've never seen him before. Because you're his resonant, Nikolai said, speaking directly to her for the first time. His voice was rough from disuse and thirst, but even weakened, it carried authority. Your blood calls to mine in a way that happens once in centuries. I've been watching over you, making sure you stayed safe. I never intended to involve you in my world. I'm sorry. Zara stared at him. You've been watching me? For how long? 6 months. 6 months? Her voice rose. You've been stalking me for half a year and you think that's protecting me? Despite everything, despite the fear and the pain and the impossible situation, Nikolai felt something almost like amusement. She was terrified, held captive by hunters with a vampire chained before her, and she was angry at him for not introducing himself properly. There was strength in her, a fire that drew him even now. I stayed away, he said quietly. I made sure you never knew I existed. In my world, humans who become involved with vampires rarely survive long. I wanted you to have your life. How noble, Zara said bitterly. And now I'm here because these people want to use me against you. So your protection worked out great. Nikolai's hands clenched, the silver chains smoking against his burned wrists. They won't hurt you. I've agreed to their terms. What terms? He's giving up his throne, Marcus interjected. Nikolai Nightshade is the king of the vampire territories. He rules over thousands of vampires across North America, and he's agreed to abdicate, to surrender all his power and authority to keep you alive. Zara looked between Marcus and Nikolai, her expression stunned. You're a king? For 3 centuries, Nikolai confirmed. And yes, I'm giving it all up. Your life is worth more than any crown. You don't even know me. Zara's voice cracked. We've never spoken before this moment. How can you give up everything for someone you don't know? Because the alternative is letting you die, Nikolai said simply. And that's not acceptable. Zara opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. This is crazy. This whole thing is crazy. Welcome to the real world, Ms. Voss, Marcus said. Now, we're going to keep you here while we arrange for the king's abdication ceremony. You won't be harmed as long as he cooperates. Try to run, try to fight, and we'll have to restrain you more severely. Do you understand? Zara nodded slowly, looking shell-shocked. The hunters led her to the far side of the warehouse and chained her to a support beam. The chains were regular metal, not silver, as she was human and couldn't break them anyway. They left her with a bottle of water and a blanket, then returned to where Nikolai waited. Satisfied? Marcus asked. For now, Nikolai replied. His eyes never left Zara, tracking her every movement. She sat down against the beam, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and stared at him across the warehouse floor. The next few hours were tense. The hunters made calls, arranged logistics, and prepared for the abdication ceremony that would take place in 2 days. Apparently, they needed time to gather the vampire court and ensure everything was properly witnessed. Nikolai listened to their planning with half his attention, the rest focused on Zara. She watched him too, her expression cycling through fear, confusion, and something that might have been curiosity. Once, when the hunters were out of earshot, she called across the warehouse. Does it hurt? The silver? Nikolai's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Yes. Good, she said, then seemed surprised at her own vehemence. I'm sorry. I shouldn't. But you were watching me for 6 months. That's terrifying. I know, Nikolai said. I told myself I was being noble, staying away. Clearly, I was wrong. You could have just introduced yourself like a normal person. I'm not a normal person. I'm a vampire king. Everyone around me is in constant danger from my enemies, from political machinations, from challenges to my authority. I wanted you to have a normal life." "Well, that plan worked perfectly," Zara said sarcastically. Then, more quietly, "What does it mean? That I'm your resident?" Nikolai was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "It means your blood sings to mine, that your scent is the most intoxicating thing I've ever encountered, that when I'm near you, the constant hunger that defines vampire existence quiets. You're not just food to me, you're something infinitely more precious. The bond doesn't force feelings, but it creates a connection. I don't expect you to understand or reciprocate. You're human. This is my burden, not yours." "That's incredibly dramatic," Zara said. "I'm 300 years old. I've earned the right to be dramatic." Despite everything, she almost smiled at that. 300 years? What was that like?" "Long," Nikolai said. "Lonely, until 6 months ago." Zara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I still think this is insane, all of it." "It is," Nikolai agreed, "but it's also real." They fell into silence after that. Hours passed. The hunters changed shifts, always leaving at least 4 guards watching both prisoners. Nikolai could feel his strength waning further without blood, but he forced himself to stay alert. He needed to think, to plan, but his thoughts kept returning to the woman chained across the warehouse from him. She had fallen asleep eventually, exhausted by fear and confusion. Nikolai watched her sleep, memorizing every detail of her face. If he survived this, if the hunters kept their word and let her go, this might be the only time he ever had with her. Once he abdicated, once his power was gone, he would have to disappear. Without his authority, without his court, he would be vulnerable to every enemy he had made in 3 centuries of rule. He would need to leave the country, maybe the continent, and stay far away from Zara to ensure she remained safe. The thought hollowed him out, but he accepted it. Her life was what mattered. On the second day, the hunters brought them both real food. Nikolai was given blood, real human blood from a bag, and though it wasn't fresh, it was enough to restore some of his strength, not enough to break the chains, but enough that he no longer felt like he was about to collapse into torpor. Zara was given actual food, sandwiches and fruit. She ate mechanically, her eyes distant. When she finished, she looked across at Nikolai. "What happens to you? After you give up your crown?" "I'll leave," Nikolai said. "Find somewhere far from here. Without my position, I have many enemies who will want revenge. And me. You go back to your life. They'll erase your memories of this, make you think you were sick for a few days. You'll never remember any of this happened." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "What if I don't want that?" Nikolai's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I don't want my memories erased? What if I want to remember?" "Why would you want to remember this nightmare?" "Because it's real," Zara said fiercely. "Because vampires exist, and magic exists, and there's this whole world I didn't know about. Because apparently I'm important enough that a king is giving up his throne for me. I don't want to go back to sleep." "Zara," Nikolai said her name for the first time, tasting it. "This world is dangerous. Humans who know about us rarely survive long. You're safer not knowing." "I was already not safe," she countered. "I've been not safe for 6 months while some vampire king stalked me and I had no idea. At least if I remember, I can make informed choices." "What choices would you make?" Nikolai asked quietly. Zara met his eyes across the warehouse. "I don't know yet, but I want the chance to make them." Before Nikolai could respond, Marcus entered the warehouse with a dozen other hunters. "It's time," he announced. "We're moving to the ceremony location." They came for Nikolai first, adding more chains before releasing him from the wall. He didn't resist as they bound him, his attention still on Zara. They pulled her to her feet as well, keeping her chained but allowing her to walk. "She doesn't need to be there," Nikolai said sharply. "She's our insurance policy," Marcus replied. "In case you get any ideas." They were loaded into separate vehicles, a convoy of black SUVs that drove through the Chicago night. Nikolai could sense where they were going even before they arrived. the old cathedral on the north side of the city, the one that had been deconsecrated 50 years ago and now served as a neutral meeting ground for supernatural negotiations. When they pulled up, Nikolai could see the gathering. His court was there, dozens of vampires in formal dress, their pale faces tight with anger and confusion. At the front stood Lucian, his second in command for the past century, a vampire with silver hair and a face like carved marble. When Lucian saw Nikolai in chains, his expression went murderous. "What is the meaning of this?" Lucian's voice cut through the night. "You dare bring our king in chains?" "Your king has agreed to abdicate," Marcus announced. "The ceremony will proceed according to proper vampire law. He will transfer his authority to a new council, and in exchange, we release him and his resonant unharmed." The assembled vampires erupted in angry shouts. Lucian held up a hand for silence, his glowing eyes never leaving Nikolai. "My lord, is this true?" Nikolai met his oldest friend's gaze steadily. "It's true. I abdicate freely and of my own will." "Nothing about this is free," Lucian said coldly. "What leverage do they have?" Nikolai didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to where the hunters were bringing Zara out of another vehicle. She looked small and frightened, surrounded by armed hunters, and every vampire in the courtyard could smell what she was. Several gasped, understanding immediately. "A resonant," someone whispered. "They took his resonant," another voice said, shocked. Lucian's face went still. "My lord, you can't do this. Without your authority, you'll be vulnerable. Every enemy you've made will come for you." "I know," Nikolai said quietly. "I'm sorry, old friend, but I have no choice." "There's always a choice," Lucian insisted. "Not this time." Nikolai turned to face his assembled court, drawing himself up despite the chains. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of command. "My people, I have been your king for 300 years. I have led you through wars and peace, through the difficult transition from the old world to the new. I have done my best to be worthy of your loyalty, but tonight I must step down. The hunters hold leverage I cannot counter, and I will not risk innocent blood to maintain my position. I abdicate freely and transfer my authority to the council the hunters have chosen." "My lord, please," Lucian said, and there was pain in his voice. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Nikolai said gently. "I need you to accept this, Lucian. I need you to help our people through the transition. Can you do that for me?" Lucian closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and nodded. "If that's your command." "It is." The ceremony proceeded according to ancient vampire law. Nikolai spoke the formal words of abdication, renouncing his crown and authority before his assembled court. The hunters had indeed chosen a council, 3 vampires who had agreed to their terms in exchange for positions of power. Nikolai didn't know them well, which was probably the point. They were weak, easily controlled, and would enforce whatever restrictions the hunters wanted. As Nikolai spoke the final words, he felt something break inside him. It wasn't physical, but it was real. The mantle of kingship, the weight he had carried for 3 centuries, lifted from his shoulders. He was suddenly, strangely light, free, but also vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since he was a newly turned vampire. "It's done," Marcus said with satisfaction. "Remove his chains." The hunters approached cautiously and began removing the silver. As the chains fell away, Nikolai's burns immediately began healing, his vampire regeneration finally able to work properly. Within minutes, the angry red marks faded to pink and then to his normal pale skin. "And her?" Nikolai looked at Zara. "She goes free. No memories of this." Marcus nodded to one of his hunters, who began approaching Zara with a small vial of something. "Wait," Zara said sharply, backing away. "I don't want to forget." "You don't have a choice," Marcus said. "Yes, she does," Nikolai said quietly. The words of abdication might have stripped his kingship, but he was still an ancient vampire, powerful and dangerous. Without the chains and with blood in his system, he could feel his strength returning. "That wasn't part of our agreement. You said she would be released unharmed. Forcing memory erasure is harm." "That's debatable," Marcus began. "Is it?" Nikolai took a single step forward, and suddenly every vampire in the courtyard tensed. Without his crown, without his authority, he was still a 300-year-old vampire, and the predatory power of that rolled off him in waves. Or shall we debate it further? Marcus's hand went to his weapon, but Lucian spoke up before the situation could escalate. The ceremony is complete. By vampire law, the abdication is binding. Your business with our former king is concluded. Release the human woman and depart in peace, or stay and test whether you can survive against this many vampires who are very, very angry with you. It was a clear threat. The hunters were outnumbered 10-1, and while they had weapons and magic, vampires were faster, stronger, and immortal. A fight would be bloody on both sides, but the outcome was certain. Marcus clearly realized this. He gestured sharply to his hunters. "Release her. Our business is done." They unlocked Zara's chains and she stumbled forward, free for the first time in 2 days. Nikolai moved to her side instantly, faster than human eyes could follow. His hand steadied her elbow as she swayed. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I think so," Zara said. She looked up at him, really looked at him now that he wasn't chained and burned. He had healed completely, his white hair falling loose around his shoulders, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. "You really gave up everything for me." "I told you I would," Nikolai said simply. "What happens now?" "Now I leave the city. It's not safe for me here anymore." Nikolai glanced at the assembled vampires, at Lucian's pained expression. "I have too many enemies who will come for me without my protection." "And me?" Zara asked. "You go home. You live your life. You forget about vampires and kings and all of this darkness." "What if I don't want to?" Zara said. Nikolai looked at her, this human woman who had somehow become the center of his world. "Zara, you barely know me. I've brought you nothing but danger." "You gave up your throne for me," she said. "A throne you held for 300 years. You did that before we'd ever even spoken. Maybe I don't know you, but I know that. And I want to know more. If you come with me, your life will never be normal again," Nikolai warned. "You'll always be in danger. My enemies won't care that I'm no longer king. They'll use you against me. As opposed to my current situation, where I apparently had a vampire king stalking me for 6 months and had no idea supernatural creatures existed." Zara raised an eyebrow. "At least if I'm with you, I'll know what's happening." Despite everything, Nikolai almost smiled. "You're taking this remarkably well." "I'm having a complete mental breakdown," Zara corrected. "I'm just doing it internally. So what do you say? Can I come with you?" Nikolai looked at her for a long moment, this brave, fierce human woman who was offering to walk into darkness with him. Every logical part of him said to refuse, to send her away, to keep her safe by keeping her distant. But when he looked at her, when he breathed in her scent and felt the way she calmed the hunger that defined his existence, he found he didn't have the strength to refuse. "If you come with me," he said slowly, "you need to understand what that means. I'm a vampire, Zara. I need blood to survive. I'm faster and stronger than any human. I'll outlive you by centuries. And right now, I have many enemies who will want revenge against me for things I've done in the past 300 years. "I understand," Zara said. "Do you?" Nikolai reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His skin was cool against her warmth, and he could feel her pulse jumping beneath his fingers. "I've wanted to touch you for 6 months. I've dreamed about the sound of your voice, the way you laugh. I stayed away because I thought that was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself. Because if you come with me now, if you choose this, I won't have the strength to let you go again." Zara leaned into his touch. "Then don't let me go." Lucian cleared his throat delicately. "My lord, forgive me, but this is very touching, and also we should probably leave before the hunters change their minds about letting you go." Nikolai glanced at his former second in command. "I'm not your lord anymore." "You'll always be my lord," Lucian said quietly. "Where will you go?" "South, I think. Mexico. Maybe further. Somewhere warm where vampires are less common, less chance of running into old enemies. Take these." Lucian held out a set of keys and a black credit card. "The estate in Veracruz. It's in my name, completely secure. The card is attached to accounts the new council doesn't know about. It's not your full wealth, but it's enough to keep you comfortable for a few decades. Lucian, take them." Lucian insisted. "You gave up your throne for your resonant. Let me give you this for 3 centuries of friendship." Nikolai took the keys and card, then pulled Lucian into a brief embrace. "Thank you, old friend. Take care of our people." "I will, and Nikolai, if you ever need anything, you call me. Council or no council, I'm still yours." They said their goodbyes quickly after that. Several other members of Nikolai's former court came forward to offer their loyalty and resources, even though he no longer held any authority over them. It was humbling and painful, walking away from people he had led for centuries. Finally, Nikolai and Zara were alone, standing in the cathedral courtyard as the vampires dispersed and the hunters withdrew. The night was quiet around them, the city sounds distant. "We should go," Nikolai said. "We can't stay in Chicago. I'll take you to get some things from your apartment, then we need to leave the city before dawn." "Okay," Zara said. She sounded tired, the adrenaline of the past 2 days finally wearing off. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "You said I'm your resonant, that my blood sings to yours. But do you actually care about me as a person? Or is this just some supernatural bond?" Nikolai was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "When I first caught your scent 6 months ago, the bond was physical, chemical. Your blood called to mine in a way I'd never experienced, but I didn't follow you that night. I went home and tried to forget you, because I knew the bond was dangerous for both of us." "What changed?" Zara asked. "The next day, I saw you again. Same coffee shop, same time. You were arguing with someone on the phone about a building design, something about load-bearing walls and unsafe foundations. You were so passionate, so fierce about doing the right thing, even though whoever you were talking to clearly didn't want to hear it. After you hung up, you saw a homeless man outside the shop, and you bought him breakfast. Didn't make a show of it, just quietly handed him food and coffee and walked away." Nikolai smiled at the memory. "I started watching you after that, not because of the bond, but because I wanted to understand who you were. I watched you work late nights on designs you cared about. I watched you visit your grandmother every Sunday and patiently listen to the same stories you'd heard 100 times. I watched you stand up to a man twice your size who was harassing a woman on the train. You're brave and kind and brilliant, and yes, your blood sings to mine. But I would care about you even without the bond." Zara was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "That's incredibly romantic, and also still kind of stalkerish." Nikolai laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "I never claimed to be perfect. 300 years as a vampire king doesn't exactly teach you proper courtship etiquette." "Well, you're learning now," Zara said. She held out her hand. "Come on, let's go get my things so we can start whatever this is going to be." Nikolai took her hand, marveling at the warmth of her skin against his cool palm. They walked together through the Chicago night, a former vampire king and a human architect, stepping into an uncertain future. They went to Zara's apartment first, a small one-bedroom in a converted warehouse building. Nikolai waited outside while she packed, still cautious about entering her private space without explicit permission. Old vampire habits died hard, and threshold rules were complicated. When she returned with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, he carried them effortlessly down to the car Lucian had left for them, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. "Is there anyone you need to say goodbye to?" Nikolai asked. "Family? Friends?" "My grandmother," Zara said quietly. "But she has Alzheimer's. She probably won't remember I visited yesterday, much less understand why I'm leaving. My parents died when I was 12. Car accident. It's mostly just been me and Gran since then. And now it's mostly just me." "I'm sorry," Nikolai said, and meant it. "What about you? Any family?" "None living. I was turned in 1725, and everyone I knew as a human has been dead for centuries. As a vampire, I had my court, my people, but not family in the human sense. They drove south through the night, leaving Chicago behind. Nikolai drove fast but carefully, his vampire reflexes making him an excellent driver. Zara dozed in the passenger seat, finally allowing herself to rest now that they were moving, putting distance between them and the hunters. As dawn approached, Nikolai pulled off at a small motel outside Indianapolis. "We'll need to stop during the day," he explained. "I can withstand sunlight for brief periods with the right protection, but it's painful and weakening. It's safer to travel at night." They got a room, and Nikolai pulled heavy blackout curtains over the windows, while Zara sat on one of the twin beds. The room was cheap and impersonal, smelling of industrial cleaner and old cigarettes. "So," Zara said. "What now?" "Now you sleep properly for the first time in days," Nikolai said, "and I keep watch." "Do you sleep?" "Vampires don't sleep in the human sense. We can enter a rest state that's closer to meditation, but we remain aware of our surroundings. True sleep only comes with torpor, when we're severely injured or starved." Zara kicked off her shoes and lay back on the bed, still fully dressed. "This is so surreal. 2 days ago, my biggest worry was a deadline at work. Now I'm in a motel room with a vampire." "A former vampire king," Nikolai corrected with a slight smile. "Does that make me a former princess?" "The vampires don't have princesses, but you would have been my consort if things had been different. Residents are accorded great respect in vampire society." "Tell me about vampire society," Zara said, stifling a yawn. "I want to know what world I'm walking into." Nikolai settled into the chair by the window, positioning himself where he could see both doors and watch Zara. "Vampire society is old and hierarchical. We're organized into territories, each governed by a lord or lady who answers to a regional king or queen. I was one of 5 kings in North America, controlling the territories from Chicago to the Canadian border. We have strict laws about feeding, about turning new vampires, about interactions with humans." "What are the laws about feeding?" Zara asked. "We're not allowed to kill humans for blood. We can feed from willing donors, purchase blood from blood banks through intermediaries, or use synthetic blood substitutes, though those are less satisfying. Rogue vampires who kill humans are hunted by their own kind and destroyed. It's in our best interest to maintain the masquerade, to keep humans unaware of our existence." "But hunters know about you." "Hunters are a complication. Some are humans who stumbled onto the truth and dedicated their lives to fighting what they see as monsters. Others are part of old bloodlines, families who have passed down knowledge and weapons for generations. Marcus is one of those 4th or 5th generation hunter. They see us as a threat to humanity that must be controlled or eliminated." "Are they right?" Zara asked quietly. Nikolai was silent for a long moment. "Yes and no. Vampires are predators. That's our nature. But we're also intelligent, capable of choice. Most vampires learn to control their hunger, to live alongside humans without being a threat. But there are rogues, young vampires who can't control themselves, or old ones who simply don't care about human life. So yes, we're dangerous, but we're not mindless monsters." "You gave up your throne for me," Zara said. "That doesn't sound like a monster." "I've done monstrous things in 300 years, Nikolai said quietly. "I've killed in war and in defense of my territory. I've executed vampires who broke our laws. I've made hard decisions that led to deaths, both vampire and human. The crown I wore wasn't symbolic, Zara. It represented real power, real violence when necessary. I'm not a good man by human standards." "But you're good by vampire standards." "I was just. I protected my people. I enforced laws that kept humans safe from rogues. I tried to be better than the king who came before me, and I think I succeeded. But just doesn't mean good." Zara considered this, her eyes growing heavy. "I think good and evil are more complicated than people want to believe. You protected me before you even knew me. You gave up everything to keep me safe. That counts for something." "Sleep," Nikolai said gently. "We can talk more when you wake." Zara's eyes drifted closed, and within minutes her breathing evened out into sleep. Nikolai watched her in the dim light filtering through the blackout curtains, this woman who had somehow become his whole world. The next week passed in a strange rhythm. They drove south through the nights, stopping at anonymous motels during the day. Nikolai stayed awake while Zara slept, keeping watch for any threats. They talked for hours as they drove, Zara asking questions about vampire culture and history, Nikolai learning about her life, her work, her dreams. He learned that she had wanted to be an architect since she was 8 years old, when her father had taken her to see the Willis Tower. She loved old buildings more than new ones, loved restoration work that preserved history while making spaces functional for modern life. She was afraid of deep water but loved swimming in pools. She could quote entire scenes from classic movies, but had terrible taste in current television. She sang off-key in the shower and was absolutely convinced she was a good singer. Zara learned that Nikolai had been turned during a voyage from England to the American colonies, attacked by a vampire who left him for dead in the ship's hold. He had crawled ashore in Virginia and spent 50 years as a rootless vampire before finding others of his kind. He had fought in the Revolutionary War on the side of the colonists because he believed in the cause, even though it went against his British origins. He had witnessed the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, both world wars, the rise of the modern age. He loved classical music, but had a secret fondness for jazz. He could speak 8 languages fluently. He had never learned to dance properly despite 3 centuries to practice because he found it awkward. They grew closer during those drives, the easy intimacy of shared space and conversation. Nikolai found himself relaxing around Zara in a way he never had with anyone. The careful control he had maintained for centuries, the distance he kept between himself and everyone else, seemed to dissolve in her presence. Zara was surprisingly comfortable around him given the circumstances. She asked questions about vampire abilities with scientific curiosity, wanted to see him move at full speed, laughed when he described the politics of the vampire court. She was adapting to this new reality with remarkable resilience. On the 5th night, somewhere in Texas, Zara asked the question Nikolai had been dreading. "Do you need to feed? Actual blood? I mean, not that synthetic stuff?" Nikolai's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm fine." "That's not an answer. When was the last time you had real blood?" "Before the hunters captured me. 9 days ago." "And how often do you need to feed?" "Every 3 to 4 days, ideally. I can go longer, but it weakens me." Zara was quiet for a moment. "What about from a willing donor?" Nikolai glanced at her sharply. "No." "Why not?" "Because feeding from a resonant is different than feeding from anyone else. It's more intense, more intimate. It would forge a deeper bond between us, and you haven't chosen that. You've barely chosen this." He gestured at the car, at their situation. "I chose to come with you," Zara pointed out. "You chose to leave with me after 2 days of captivity and trauma. That's not the same as making a clear, informed choice about something as significant as allowing a vampire to feed from you." "Stop being noble," Zara said. "It doesn't suit you." Despite himself, Nikolai smiled. "I'm a former king. Noble is literally in the job description." "You're also weakening yourself because you're trying to protect me from myself," Zara said. "That's not noble. That's stupid. We're going into a situation where you might need to defend us both. You need to be strong. I'll find a blood bank or a donor in the next city." "Or you can feed from me," Zara interrupted. "I'm offering, Nikolai, freely, no coercion, no confusion. I understand what it means, and I'm choosing this." Nikolai was silent for a long time, fighting with himself. The hunger was constant, a burning in his throat and belly that he had learned to ignore over centuries. But the thought of feeding from Zara, of tasting her blood, was almost overwhelming. He had smelled her scent for 6 months, had dreamed about it, and had forced himself to stay away. "Pull over," Zara said quietly. "Zara, pull over." Nikolai pulled the car off onto a deserted side road, putting it in park but leaving the engine running. They were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, darkness pressing in on all sides. Zara unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him. "How does this work?" "I don't think this is a good idea," Nikolai said, but his eyes were fixed on the pulse in her throat, the way her heartbeat had quickened. "Your eyes are literally glowing right now," Zara said. "You want this, and I'm offering. So tell me how it works." Nikolai closed his eyes briefly, fighting for control. When he opened them, his voice was rough. "The traditional way is from the wrist or throat. The throat is more intimate, but also more dangerous. I would need to be very careful not to take too much. Your body can handle losing about a pint of blood safely, but in the moment, when I'm feeding, the hunger can be overwhelming. I would need you to tell me to stop, and I would need to be strong enough to listen." "You're strong enough," Zara said with certainty. "You've had 3 centuries to learn control." She was right, but that didn't make this easier. Nikolai reached out slowly and took her hand, bringing her wrist to his lips. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers, and her scent filled the car, making his fangs ache. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I stop, immediately. Do you understand?" I understand. Nikolai let his fangs extend, the sharp canines lengthening. He saw Zara's eyes widen slightly, but she didn't pull away. He pressed his lips to her wrist, feeling her pulse against his mouth, and then bit down. The moment her blood touched his tongue, Nikolai understood why feeding from a resonant was considered one of the most intense experiences a vampire could have. Her blood was like liquid fire, burning down his throat and spreading warmth through his body. It was sweet and rich and perfect, and the hunger that had been a constant ache for 9 days suddenly roared to life, demanding more. He could hear Zara's heartbeat accelerating, feel the way her body tensed and then relaxed. Feeding created a sort of euphoria in the donor, a natural anesthetic that made the process less frightening. But with a resonant, it was more than that. He could feel her emotions through the blood bond, the strange mix of fear and curiosity and something warmer, something almost like affection. Nikolai forced himself to stay in control, to take only what he needed. He counted her heartbeats, monitored her breathing, made sure she stayed strong. After what felt like both an eternity and an instant, he pulled back, sealing the wound with a touch of his tongue. The vampire saliva would heal it quickly, leaving only the faintest mark. Zara swayed slightly, and Nikolai caught her, pulling her carefully into his lap. She was warm and pliant against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "That was intense," she murmured. "Are you all right?" Nikolai's voice was rough, his control still shaky. Dizzy, but good. You?" Nikolai could feel strength flooding back into him, the weakness from 9 days without proper feeding vanishing. But more than that, he could still taste her on his tongue, could feel the warmth of her blood spreading through him. The bond between them had deepened, becoming something more tangible. "I'm better than I've been in days," he admitted. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Zara lifted her head to look at him, and their faces were suddenly very close. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Haven't all your questions been personal?" She smiled. "Fair point. I was just wondering, in 300 years, have you ever been in love?" Nikolai was quiet for a long moment, his arms still around her. "Once. A long time ago. She was human, and I was young enough to think it could work. It didn't. She aged, and I didn't. She wanted children, a normal life, and I couldn't give her that. We parted ways when she met someone who could give her what she needed. She died 60 years ago, surrounded by her grandchildren, having lived a full human life. I attended her funeral from a distance and was glad she had been happy." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. "Don't be. She made the right choice. I was never what she needed long term, and she was wise enough to see it. And after her? Companions, lovers, nothing that lasted, nothing that mattered. I learned to keep my distance, to not let anyone too close. And then I caught your scent 6 months ago, and everything changed." Zara reached up and touched his face, her warm fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm not her. I'm not going to run away because this is complicated." "You should," Nikolai said quietly. "I'm 300 years old, Zara. I'll watch you age and die. I'll outlive you by centuries. Choosing me means choosing a relationship with an expiration date." "Every relationship has an expiration date," Zara countered. "Human relationships end in death too, we just don't know when. At least we're going into this with our eyes open. You're 23 years old. You should have a lifetime ahead of you, meeting someone your own age, building a normal life." "Stop trying to protect me from my own choices," Zara said firmly. "I'm an adult. I know this is complicated and scary and probably stupid, but I also know that you're the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me. You're brave and honorable, and you gave up your throne to keep me safe. So stop trying to convince me to leave, and accept that I'm choosing to stay." Nikolai looked at her, this fierce young woman who had somehow worked her way into his heart, and felt something in him surrender. He had spent 6 months staying away from her, and then 2 days in chains watching her across a warehouse, and now she was in his arms offering him everything, and he didn't have the strength to refuse anymore. "If you stay," he said quietly, "I'm going to fall in love with you. I'm already halfway there." "Good," Zara said, "because I'm pretty sure I'm falling too." She kissed him then, leaning up to press her warm lips against his cool ones. It was gentle and tentative, a first kiss that tasted like trust and possibility. Nikolai kissed her back carefully, aware of his fangs, aware of her fragility, aware that everything had just changed between them. When they finally pulled apart, Zara was smiling. "So what happens now?" "Now we keep driving south," Nikolai said. "We get to Veracruz. We figure out how to build a life together, and I try very hard not to screw this up." "Sounds like a plan." They drove on through the Texas night, Zara back in her seat but holding Nikolai's hand across the console. They talked about practicalities, about what their life might look like. Zara would need a new job, but she could do freelance architecture work remotely. Nikolai had enough funds from Lucian to keep them comfortable. They would need to be careful, to stay away from vampire politics and hunter attention. 3 nights later, they crossed into Mexico and continued south to Veracruz. The estate Lucian had given them was beautiful. An old colonial mansion on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and lush gardens. It had clearly been maintained by someone, the rooms clean and furnished, the security system modern despite the building's age. "This is incredible," Zara said, walking through the rooms. The mansion was all dark wood and white plaster, high ceilings and tiled floors, shuttered windows that could block out the sun. "Lucian always had good taste," Nikolai said. He was checking the security system, making sure the property was truly secure. Old habits died hard. They spent the next few days settling in. Zara set up a workspace in one of the upstairs bedrooms, contacting her old firm to formally resign and beginning to build a portfolio for freelance work. Nikolai arranged for regular blood deliveries from a local source, expensive but necessary. They learned to live together, to navigate the strange rhythm of a relationship between a human and a vampire. Zara kept human hours mostly, sleeping at night and working during the day while Nikolai was less active. Nikolai was most alert during the night, often spending the daylight hours in his rest state. They met at dawn and dusk, sharing meals together, Zara eating human food while Nikolai watched. Nikolai fed from her once a week, and each time the bond between them deepened. Zara could sense his emotions more clearly, could sometimes feel his presence even when he was in another room. For Nikolai, having a resonant he fed from regularly was transformative. The constant hunger that had defined his existence for centuries quieted to a background hum. He felt more centered, more himself than he had in decades. They grew closer emotionally as well, sharing stories and fears and dreams. Zara told him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about the loneliness of growing up with only her grandmother. Nikolai shared centuries of memories, both beautiful and terrible, giving her glimpses into the long life he had lived. 2 months after arriving in Veracruz, Zara woke in the middle of the day to find Nikolai standing at the bedroom window, staring out at the sunlit garden. He had the shutters cracked just slightly, letting in a thin beam of light that he held his hand in. His skin smoked slightly where the sunlight touched it, but he didn't pull away. "What are you doing?" Zara asked, alarmed. "Testing something," Nikolai said. He pulled his hand back, and the burns immediately began healing. "I've been thinking about what you said, about all relationships having expiration dates. Okay? There's a way for a vampire to turn a human. It's dangerous, and it doesn't always work, but it's possible. The human has to be drained nearly to death, then fed vampire blood while their heart is still beating. If it works, they transform over several days. If it doesn't, they simply die." Zara sat up in bed, pulling the sheets around herself. "Are you asking if I want to become a vampire?" "Not now," Nikolai said quickly. "You're 23. You have a whole human life ahead of you. But someday when you're older, when you've lived a full human life and you're ready, if you still want to be with me, it's an option. I wanted you to know that. The expiration date on our relationship doesn't have to be your death. It can be your transformation if that's what you choose." Zara was quiet for a long time, processing this. "That's a hell of a thing to offer." "I know, and I'm not asking you to decide now or even in the next few years. I just wanted you to know the option exists. If you choose to stay human, I'll love you for the rest of your life and cherish every moment we have. If you choose to transform someday, I'll love you for the rest of eternity. Either way, I'm yours." Zara got out of bed and went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. I love you too. I don't know what I'll choose eventually, but I love you. They stood there together, a vampire and a human, looking out at the sunlit garden that one of them couldn't walk in. It should have been sad, but somehow it wasn't. Somehow it was perfect. The peace lasted 3 months. Nikolai smelled them before he heard them, vampires approaching the estate under cover of darkness. Old vampires, powerful ones. He was with Zara in the study, reading while she worked on a design for a client, when he tensed. We have visitors, he said quietly, already moving to put himself between Zara and the door. Visitors or threats? Unknown. Stay here. Nikolai went downstairs, his senses extended, tracking the vampires as they came over the wall. There were 3 of them, moving with the coordinated precision of trained fighters. He considered his options quickly. He could fight, but 3-on-1 odds were poor even for a vampire of his age, especially if they were prepared for him. Better to see what they wanted first. He opened the front door before they could knock, stepping out onto the front steps. This is private property. State your business. The lead vampire was a woman with white hair, bound in an intricate braid, her pale skin almost luminous in the moonlight. She wore modern clothes, but moved with the bearing of someone far older than she looked. When she spoke, her accent was faintly Russian. Nikolai Nightshade, the fallen king. I am Katerina of the Moscow bloodline. These are my companions, Dmitri and Ivan. We've been searching for you. You found me. What do you want? The council that rules in your place is weak. They bow to human hunters, enforce restrictions that make a mockery of our kind. Many in the vampire world are displeased. That's not my concern anymore, Nikolai said carefully. I abdicated. Their rule is legitimate. You abdicated under duress, Katerina countered. The ceremony was witnessed. Everyone saw the hunters holding your resident hostage. Under vampire law, an abdication made under duress can be challenged. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. Challenged how? You could take back your throne, declare the abdication void. You would have support. Nikolai, many vampires would rally to you. And why would you want this? Nikolai asked. The Moscow bloodline has never had interest in North American politics. Because weak leadership in North America threatens all vampires globally. If the hunters gain too much power over your territories, they will expand their influence. Already they are making demands on European vampires, emboldened by their success with the new council. We need strong leadership in North America, and you were strong. Nikolai considered this carefully. The idea of taking back his throne was tempting in some ways. He had spent 3 centuries as king, and walking away had been harder than he wanted to admit. But taking back power would mean war, and war would mean putting Zara in danger. I appreciate the offer, he said finally, but I'm not interested. I gave up my crown to protect someone I love. Taking it back would put her at risk again. Find another candidate for your coup. Katerina's expression hardened. This isn't an offer, Nikolai. This is an opportunity I'm giving you to cooperate voluntarily. There are many vampires who want change, and they believe you're the key. If you won't come willingly, we'll have to insist. Nikolai's expression went cold, all the predatory power of 3 centuries flooding to the surface. You're threatening me in my own home? We're offering you reality, Katerina said. One way or another, there will be change in North America. The question is whether you want to be part of it or whether we have to force your hand. Before Nikolai could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Zara standing in the doorway, and his heart sank. I told you to stay inside, he said. I heard voices. Who are these people? Zara looked at the 3 vampires with caution, but not fear. Katerina's eyes lit up with interest. The Resonant. We had heard rumors but weren't sure they were true. She's younger than I expected. Leave her out of this, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to a growl. But she's already involved, Katerina said reasonably. You gave up your throne for her. That makes her very relevant to our interests. Zara stepped up beside Nikolai, and he could feel her fear through their bond, but also her determination. I don't know what's happening here, but I know a threat when I hear one. You should leave. Katerina smiled, showing fangs. Brave little human. Very well. We'll leave for tonight. But think about what we've said, Nikolai. You have 1 week to decide. Either you agree to challenge your abdication and take back your throne, or we'll find another way to motivate you." The 3 vampires vanished into the darkness, moving faster than human eyes could follow. Nikolai stood on the front steps, every muscle tense until he was certain they were truly gone. Then he turned to Zara. "We need to leave, tonight, right now." "What? Why?" "Because they know where we are, and they're not going to give up. Katerina is old, probably 500 or 600 years. She didn't come all the way from Moscow to make a polite request. She came because she needs me for something, and when I refuse, she's going to escalate. What does she want? She wants me to take back my throne, which would require starting a war with the current council. I think she and her allies want to use me as a figurehead for a larger vampire conflict, probably with the goal of overthrowing the hunter influence entirely. It's politics, vampire style, and it's going to get bloody." Zara's face went pale. "So we run?" "We run. We find somewhere even more remote, somewhere they can't track us." Nikolai was already moving, heading back inside to gather their things. They packed quickly, taking only essentials. Nikolai cleared out the cash and documents Lucian had left, destroying anything that might help someone track them. Within an hour, they were on the road again, heading south away from Veracruz. "I'm sorry," Nikolai said as he drove through the dark countryside. "I brought this into your life." "You didn't bring it," Zara said firmly. "It came on its own, and we'll handle it together." "Together isn't safe. If they're willing to threaten me through you once, they'll do it again. Maybe you should—" "Don't," Zara interrupted. "Don't say I should leave. We're past that. You're not getting rid of me, so stop trying." Despite the situation, Nikolai smiled slightly. "You're very stubborn." "I learned from the best." Zara reached over and took his hand. "So where are we going?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere they won't expect. South America maybe, or Asia. Somewhere I can disappear completely." "A vampire king can't just disappear." "A former vampire king can try." They drove through the night and into the next day, Nikolai pushing through the discomfort of daylight with heavy sunglasses and long sleeves. They ditched the car in Mexico City and bought a different one with cash, changing their route and trying to cover their tracks. For 3 days, they moved constantly, sleeping in different places each day, never staying anywhere long enough to be tracked. Nikolai was tense the entire time, his senses extended for any sign of pursuit, but they seemed to be clean, and slowly, he started to relax. They were in a small town in Costa Rica, checking into yet another anonymous motel, when Nikolai's phone rang. It was a new phone, a burner they'd picked up in Mexico City, and only one person had the number. Lucian. Nikolai answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Katerina found me," Lucian said without preamble. "She's been asking questions about you, about where you might go. I've told her nothing, but she's threatening our people, Nikolai. She says if you don't come back and challenge the council within 3 days, she's going to start killing vampires in your former territory until you do." Nikolai closed his eyes. "How many has she killed?" "None yet. But she's serious. She has forces in Chicago, at least 20 vampires loyal to her. The new council is too weak to stop her. You need to come back." "I can't. If I come back, I'm playing right into her hands." "If you don't come back, innocent vampires are going to die because they were loyal to you. Is that what you want?" It was a low blow, and Lucian knew it. Nikolai had always taken his responsibility to his people seriously. To let them die because he wanted to keep Zara safe was unconscionable. But to go back and fight Katerina meant putting Zara directly in the line of fire again. "I need time to think," Nikolai said. "You have 3 days. I'm sorry, my friend. I know this is impossible, but it's the situation we're in." Nikolai hung up and stood still for a long moment. Zara came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What did he say?" Nikolai told her, his voice flat. When he finished, Zara was quiet for a moment. "You have to go back," she said finally. "I can't. It's a trap. It's a trap either way. If you go back, she gets what she wants, and you fight the council. If you don't, she kills people you care about until you do. At least if you go back on your own terms, you have some control. And you? I come with you." "Absolutely not." Nikolai turned to face her. "She's using you as leverage. If you come back, you're giving her a weapon to use against me." "I'm already a weapon she's using against you," Zara pointed out. At least if I'm there, I can make my own choices about it. I won't let you face this alone." They argued about it for hours, but Zara was immovable. Finally, exhausted and out of options, Nikolai surrendered. They would go back to Chicago together. He would face Katerina and find some way to resolve this that didn't end with everyone he cared about dead. It took them 2 days to travel back, using false documents and circuitous routes to avoid detection. They arrived in Chicago the night before Katerina's deadline, and Nikolai contacted Lucian to arrange a meeting. They met in the same deconsecrated cathedral where the abdication ceremony had taken place, which felt grimly appropriate. Katerina was waiting with her forces, 24 vampires spread throughout the building. Lucian was there with what remained loyal of Nikolai's former court, roughly the same number. The new council was also present, 3 weak vampires who looked terrified to be in the same room as so much power. Nikolai entered with Zara at his side, and every eye in the cathedral turned to them. "Nikolai," Katerina said, her voice pleased, "I'm glad you came to your senses." "I didn't come to challenge the council," Nikolai said clearly. "I came to tell you to leave my people alone." "Your people," Katerina laughed. "You abdicated, remember? They're not your people anymore." "They're still mine in every way that matters. I'm not going to war with the council, Katerina. Whatever game you're playing, find someone else." "It's not a game," Katerina said, her voice hardening. "The hunters are growing stronger every day. They've neutered the North American territories with their puppet council. If we don't push back now, they'll do the same in Europe, in Asia, everywhere. We need a strong leader to stand against them, and you're that leader." "I was that leader. I gave it up. Under duress. The abdication isn't valid." "It's valid because I choose to let it be," Nikolai said firmly. "I don't want my crown back. I want to live in peace with the woman I love. That's all." "That's not an option I can give you," Katerina said. "You're too important to be allowed to disappear. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to challenge the council. You're going to take back your throne. You're going to lead the resistance against the hunters. And if you refuse, I'm going to kill every vampire in this room who was loyal to you, starting with Lucian." She moved faster than thought, a blur of motion that ended with her hand around Lucian's throat. He struggled, but she was older and stronger, and she held him easily. "Let him go," Nikolai said, his voice deadly quiet. "Challenge the council," Katerina countered. "Take back your throne. Say the words right now, and he lives." Nikolai looked at his oldest friend, at the vampire who had stood beside him for a century, who had given him sanctuary and support after his abdication. Then he looked at Zara, standing beside him, her hand tight in his. Through their bond, he felt her love, her fear, but also her trust. She believed in him, believed he would find a way through this. And suddenly, Nikolai saw it, the solution that had been hiding in plain sight. "I'll challenge the council," he said. "I'll take back my throne, on one condition." "You're not in a position to make conditions," Katerina said. "I'm the only person who can give you what you want. So yes, I am. Here's my condition. When I take back the throne, I'll work with the hunters to establish new terms of coexistence, real terms negotiated in good faith that protect both vampires and humans. I'll push back against their overreach, but I won't start a war. If that's acceptable, I'll do this. If you want a war, find another figurehead." Katerina's eyes narrowed. "That's not what we want." "That's what you're going to get," Nikolai said flatly. "Because the alternative is, I let you kill everyone in this room, and then I disappear again. You need me more than I need you, Katerina. So either accept my terms or walk away." There was a long, tense silence. Finally, Katerina released Lucian, who stumbled back, gasping. "Fine. Take back your throne. Negotiate with the hunters. But if your negotiations fail, if they continue to overreach, you'll lead the resistance." "If my negotiations fail, we'll revisit the conversation," Nikolai said carefully. "But I reserve the right to make my own decisions about war." Katerina looked frustrated but nodded. "Agreed." Nikolai turned to the council, the 3 vampires who had taken his throne 3 months ago. They looked terrified and relieved in equal measure. "I, Nikolai Nightshade, challenge the legitimacy of my abdication on the grounds that it was made under duress. I claim the throne of the North American territories by right of power and lineage. Do any of you contest this claim?" The 3 council members looked at each other, than at the room full of vampires who would clearly support Nikolai. "No contest," one of them said quickly. "Then by vampire law, I reclaim my throne and my authority. The previous council is dissolved. Lucian, you're reinstated as my second. And someone get me Marcus. We need to talk." The hunters arrived an hour later, armed and wary. Marcus looked older than he had 3 months ago, more tired, as if the past season had worn him down. He looked at Nikolai, standing once again at the head of his assembled court, and something almost like resignation crossed his face. "So the abdication didn't stick," he said. "It was made under duress," Nikolai replied. "I've reclaimed my throne, but I'm not here to start a war, Marcus. I'm here to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "Terms we can both live with. You want vampires controlled, kept from killing humans, kept from turning people recklessly. I want my people safe from hunter aggression, able to live without constant threat. There's common ground there if we're willing to look for it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The last time we negotiated, we put a puppet council in place. Why should this time be different?" "Because last time you had my resident hostage, and I had no choice. This time, I'm negotiating from a position of strength, and we both know I could crush your forces if I wanted to. But I don't want to. I'm tired of fighting, Marcus. I gave up my throne for peace, and I only took it back because I was forced to. So let's try something different. Let's try actually working together." "What are you proposing?" "Joint oversight. Hunters and vampires working together to police rogues. Clear laws about feeding and turning that both sides agree to. Safe zones where humans and vampires can interact under controlled conditions. Regular meetings between hunter leaders and vampire lords to address concerns. A real attempt at coexistence instead of this constant Cold War." "That's ambitious," Marcus said. "It's necessary. The alternative is conflict that will eventually spill into the human world in a way that can't be hidden. Is that what you want?" Marcus looked at his hunters, then back at Nikolai. "I'll have to discuss this with my people, but I'm willing to try, on one condition." "What condition?" "Your resident, Ms. Voss. She's human, and she knows about our world now. If we're doing this, if we're working toward real coexistence, she needs to be part of it. A human voice in vampire matters." Nikolai glanced at Zara, who had been standing quietly beside him. She looked surprised but nodded slowly. "I can do that," she said. "If it helps, I'll be part of this." "Then we have a starting point," Marcus said. He held out his hand to Nikolai. Nikolai took it, shaking the hunter's hand for the first time in his long life. "We have a starting point." The negotiations took months. Nikolai reclaimed his throne and his authority, but he used it differently than before. Instead of ruling by decree, he worked with representatives from both the hunter community and the vampire territories to establish new laws and protocols. Zara became an unexpected voice in those negotiations, bringing a human perspective that neither hunters nor vampires had considered. They established mixed patrols to hunt rogues, vampire and hunter teams working together. They created registration systems so vampires could access ethically sourced blood without killing. They set up neutral zones where humans could safely interact with vampires under supervision, places where the curious and the friendly could meet without fear. It wasn't perfect. There were conflicts, setbacks, vampires, and hunters who refused to cooperate. But slowly, month by month, things got better. The constant warfare that had characterized vampire-hunter relations began to ease into something more like wary cooperation. Nikolai ruled from Chicago once again, but he was a different king than he had been before. He had learned something during his brief time away from power, something about what really mattered. He kept Zara close, including her in his decisions, learning to balance his role as king with his role as her partner. Zara thrived in this new world. She continued her architecture work, but also became an advocate for human-vampire coexistence, working with both communities to build understanding. She was brave and brilliant, and watching her navigate this dangerous new world with such grace made Nikolai fall more in love with her every day. 2 years after Nikolai reclaimed his throne, he and Zara stood in the gardens behind his Chicago estate on a warm summer night. The estate was different from the one he'd had before, more home than fortress, with spaces designed for both of them. Zara had helped design the renovations, creating areas that were comfortable for a human and safe for a vampire. "I've been thinking about your offer," Zara said quietly. Nikolai looked at her, his heart suddenly beating faster than it had in centuries. "Which offer?" "The one about becoming a vampire, about transformation." "Zara, you're 25. You have so much life ahead of you still." "I know," she interrupted, "and I don't want to do it right now, but someday when I'm older, when I've lived a full human life, I want that option. I want to choose eternity with you." Nikolai pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I love you, Nikolai. I love this world we're building together. I love the person I am with you, and I don't want it to end when my human life does." "It won't be easy," Nikolai warned. "The transformation is dangerous, and being a vampire is hard, even with all the progress we've made." "Nothing worth having is easy," Zara said. "You taught me that." Nikolai kissed her then, pouring 3 centuries of loneliness and 2 years of love into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I gave up my crown for you once," he said quietly. "I would have given up everything, my power, my immortality, my life itself. But instead, you gave me a reason to take it all back. You made me stronger, better. You made me want to build something lasting instead of just surviving." "We built it together," Zara corrected, "and we'll keep building, for the rest of my human life, and then for the rest of eternity." They stood together in the garden, a vampire king and his human resonant looking up at the stars. Around them, Chicago hummed with life, both human and vampire, both communities learning to coexist in ways that had never been possible before. There would be more challenges ahead, more conflicts to resolve, more progress to make, but they would face it together, now and always. Nikolai had been willing to give up his crown for love. What he had found instead was that love had made his crown worth wearing. The price had been steep, the journey difficult, but standing here with Zara in his arms, he knew he would pay it again 1,000 times over. This was what he had been searching for across 3 centuries. Not power or authority or immortality, but this. Someone to share it all with. Someone who chose him not because of his crown, but despite it. Someone brave enough to walk into darkness with him and strong enough to bring light. Katerina had been right about one thing. He was too important to disappear. But she had been wrong about what made him important. It wasn't his power or his age or his ability to lead armies. It was this, his willingness to sacrifice everything for love, and his ability to build something better from the ashes of what he had lost. The Vampire King had given his crown freely to save the woman he loved, and in doing so, he had discovered that she was the only crown he had ever truly needed. Years passed in a rhythm of peace and progress. The vampire-hunter cooperation that had seemed impossible became routine. Rogue vampires were handled by mixed teams. Disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. Humans who knew about the supernatural world increased in number, carefully vetted and integrated into the community. Zara continued to age gracefully, her dark hair gaining streaks of silver, her face developing laugh lines and character. She remained beautiful to Nikolai, perhaps more so as the years added depth to her features. She had become a key figure in vampire-human relations, respected by both communities for her fairness and wisdom. On her 50th birthday, Zara sat with Nikolai in their private chambers and said the words he had been both hoping for and dreading. "I'm ready." Nikolai looked at her, this woman who had been the center of his world for 27 years. "Are you certain? Once we do this, there's no going back." "I've had a full human life. I've accomplished things I'm proud of. I've experienced love and loss and joy. I've lived, Nikolai, really lived, and now I want to keep living, with you, for as long as eternity lasts. The transformation is dangerous. There's a chance. I know the risks. We've discussed them 100 times. I'm not afraid." "I'm afraid," Nikolai admitted. "I'm terrified of losing you." "Then don't lose me, turn me, make me like you, give me forever." The transformation took 3 days. Nikolai drained her to the edge of death, then fed her his own blood, ancient and powerful. She convulsed in his arms, dying and being reborn simultaneously. He stayed with her every moment, holding her through the pain, whispering encouragement, praying to gods he no longer believed in that she would survive. On the third day, Zara Voss opened her eyes. They were the same dark brown they had always been, but now they caught the light like a predator's. Her skin had paled to the characteristic white of a vampire, and when she smiled, fangs glinted in her mouth. "I'm hungry," she said, and her voice was her own but carried new resonance. Nikolai laughed, relief and joy flooding through him. "That's normal. Come on, let me teach you how to feed properly." They spent the next months adjusting to their new reality. Zara learned to control her new strength, her new speed, her new senses. She learned to manage the hunger, to feed without killing. She learned what it meant to be a vampire in the modern world. And Nikolai learned what it meant to have a partner who would truly last. No more watching the person he loved grow old and die. No more counting the years they had left. Just forever, stretching out before them, full of possibility. Zara took her place at Nikolai's side officially, not just as his resonant, but as his partner in leadership. She brought new perspectives to the vampire court, new ideas about coexistence and progress. Under their joint leadership, the North American territories prospered, becoming a model for vampire communities worldwide. They traveled together, visiting other vampire territories, helping other leaders establish similar cooperative systems with hunters. They built schools where young vampires could learn control and ethics. They established hospitals where vampires could receive medical treatment or donate blood safely. They changed the world, one careful step at a time. A century after Nikolai had first given up his crown, he stood with Zara on a balcony overlooking Chicago. The city had changed dramatically, technology advancing in ways even he found surprising. But some things remained constant. The night sky above, the wind from the lake, and the woman beside him. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked. "Giving up your throne that first time?" "Never," Nikolai said without hesitation. "It brought me you. Everything else followed from that." "We've built something good, haven't we? These past 100 years? We've built something extraordinary. A world where vampires and humans can coexist peacefully. A world where love between species isn't just possible, but celebrated. A world worth living in." Zara leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, marveling as he always did at her presence. She was vampire now, immortal and powerful, but she was still Zara, still brave and fierce and kind, still the woman who had agreed to walk into darkness with him when she barely knew him. "I love you," Zara said quietly. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for giving me those human years to live and grow before making this choice. Thank you for choosing eternity with me, for being willing to become this, to stay with me forever." They stood together as the night deepened around them, two vampires with white hair and pale skin, powerful and content. Around them, their city lived and breathed, humans and vampires existing side by side in careful balance. The Vampire King had given up his crown for love, and in return, love had given him everything. Not just his throne back, but a partner to share it with. Not just immortality, but someone to make that immortality meaningful. Not just power, but purpose. He had ruled alone for 3 centuries, and it had been hollow. Now he ruled with Zara at his side, and every night was full of meaning and joy. This was what he had been searching for across all those long years. Not power or authority or control, but this. Connection, partnership, love. The price had been steep. His crown, his pride, his carefully built walls. But Zara had been worth every sacrifice. She would always be worth it. And as they stood together looking out over their city, their territory, their world, Nikolai knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Not just once, but again and again, every day for the past century. He had given up his crown gladly for love, and love had given him a kingdom worth ruling, forever stretched out before them, full of challenges and triumphs, conflicts and resolutions, but they would face it all together. 2 vampires, 2 partners, 2 souls who had found each other across the divide between human and immortal and chosen to build something beautiful. This was their story. A vampire king who learned that some things were worth more than power, and a human woman brave enough to love him despite everything. They had changed each other, changed their world, and would continue changing it for centuries to come. And it all started because, when they asked for his crown, he gave it gladly. Because she was worth more than any throne. Because love, real love, required sacrifice. And he had finally found someone worth sacrificing everything for. The end was really a beginning. The beginning of forever, together. Building a world where love could triumph over fear. Where different species could find common ground. Where a vampire king and his human-turned-vampire queen could rule with wisdom and compassion. They had paid the price, both of them, his crown, her humanity. But what they gained in return was beyond measure, each other, now and always, for the rest of eternity. And that was worth everything.